Hey everyone, it's Paul from One Cast One Fish, and today, right here, we're going to be testing an age-old myth for plausibility. Every day I get multiple comments about mounting your transducer inside the hull of your kayak. And that's because, let's face it, mounting the transducer for your Garmin Striker Fishfinder inside the hull of a kayak is a great place to put it, and it keeps it out of the way. However, if you do scroll through the comments, there seems to be a little bit of concern about this transducer overheating and possibly causing damage over time. But today we're going to put that to rest as we find out if this little fella right here gets way too hot mounted in here. Before we get started, we're going to go over some of the basic equipment and settings that we'll be using during this test. We have our basic Garmin Striker 4 Fishfinder and transducer, and that'll be powered by the Aqua Pro Power Kit 10 amp hour battery. And on our Garmin Striker 4 Fishfinder, we're going to be operating in traditional sonar throughout this test. Now I want you to take a look at the backlight setting, which is going to be set at 100% for this test with a color mode selection of daytime. And we chose these settings because we want to make sure we're using and transmitting the most power possible through that Fishfinder and transducer. So the first test we're going to perform our water test. And for that, we're actually going to fill a bucket with both hot and then cold water. And these tests are going to give us some more information about how the transducer temperature tracks the temperature of the water that it's immersed in, kind of like a more traditional mounting method. So we're in the kitchen filling up the bucket with semi-cold water so we can test that transducer temperature tracking when in cold water. So for our cold water test, we're going to be looking at the ambient temperature when we start, the water temperature when we start, and our starting transducer temperature. And then we're going to take those same readings an hour after everything's been sitting in those conditions and see where we're at. Let's get that initial ambient temperature and see where our starting point is. And it looks like we're going to be starting at about 74 degrees. Let's get the starting temperature for our transducer. And if you look here, we're looking right about 75 degrees, which is pretty close to ambient, which is what I would expect. And for our cold water test, we have our bucket with our temperature probe, and we're reading about 62 degrees on that cold water inside the bucket. As you can see, our Fishfinder is on and we're still at 100% backlight. So let's grab that transducer and put it in the water. And now we wait and we'll check our temperature readings in an hour. But remember, while we wait, we hydrate. See you all in an hour. So it's been 1 hour now and we're headed back out to see what our temperature's done on our transducer. So it looks like ambient temperatures come up about 1 degree. We're at 75 degrees currently. Our current water temperatures come up a little bit and we're sitting at 65 degrees. Now it's time to answer the real question. Did our temperature of our transducer come up when submerged in cold water? And the moment we've all been waiting for? We're looking at a transducer temperature of 65 degrees. 65 degrees for that transducer temperature, which means that our transducer temperature is exactly the same temperature as the water that has been submerged in. Now it's time to get rid of that bucket of cold water and we're going to refill it with hot water, preferably about 85 to 90 degrees, which is about the maximum summer temperatures of some of the lakes and ponds that I fish in the kayak. We're back in the kitchen filling our bucket with hot water this time, trying to get that magic 85 to 90 degree temperature to kind of mimic the lakes and ponds during the heat of the summer. We finally got that temperature under control. It looks like we're settled out at about 82 degrees currently, which is a little cooler than I was hoping for. We were shooting for 85 to 90 degrees for this test, but this should be adequate because we're really looking for a baseline to see how warm that transducer gets when submerged in warmer water. And for current ambient temperature, we're looking at 76 degrees. And our starting transducer temperature is at 76 degrees, which doesn't surprise me considering it took a little bit of time to get that water temperature for the hot water test to the proper temperature. So it gave that transducer a chance to cool back down to ambient. Now make sure that Fishfinder's turned back on, and we're going to grab our transducer and we're going to put it back into the warm water for the test. Now we have an hour to wait till we get our next set of readings on our transducer temperature for the hot water test. So in the meantime, I'm going to head on inside and go grab some lunch. Break time's over, so it's time to head back and check the results of our 1 hour hot water test. Alright, first things first, let's check our current water temperature. And we're looking like 80 degrees for our water temp currently. Now let's pull the transducer out and see what we're looking at for a temperature on that transducer. So we're looking at about 78 degrees for that transducer. So in that test, it looks like our transducer was actually 2 degrees colder than the water that it was submerged in, which in reality is probably impossible. So we're going to chalk that little bit of difference up to a margin of error. I mean, 2 degrees isn't really that big a deal. And we're looking at a current ambient temperature, 78 degrees. Now it's time to get into the real interesting test, where we're going to take our Garmin Striker transducer and we're going to leave it out in the ambient conditions and see if we get any temperature rise. Now we're doing this open air test because I want to see with the ambient air conditions, a little bit of a breeze, things like that, if that has any effect on our transducer temperature. Let's get our ambient temperature, which is currently showing 80 degrees, and our transducer temperature, which right now is 82 degrees. As you can see, our Fishfinder's on and our transducer sitting right there open air inside the kayak. And now we chill for another hour till we get our next set of readings. It's been an hour now, so we're headed out to find out what our transducer temperature is in our open air test. Let's talk about this test for a second and kind of what I'm expecting to see in the results. Now I am expecting to see a little bit of a temperature rise. In my opinion, I'm expecting to find probably about a 5-degree temperature rise on the transducer sitting out here in the open air. But I don't think that that temperature rise on the transducer is a result of actually the transducer working or running or being turned on. I think the temperature rise that we're going to see is more a result of the ambient conditions and sun that's going to be adding heat to that transducer since it is sitting out in the open. Right now we're sitting at 80 degrees still for our ambient temperature outside. And our transducer temperature is 87 degrees. So that's a 7-degree temperature increase on our transducer while it's running outside in ambient conditions. Alright, so next up is our in-hull transducer test. So we're going to take a few minutes to get everything set up here and get that transducer mounted down there inside this kayak hull. Alright, we're going to put this transducer in here just like we would if we were actually out here fishing. So I'm going to place it right here in this putty, just like I would if I was actually out on the lake, to make it as accurate as possible. Alright, so it looks like current temperature is at 78 degrees. So in addition to our ambient temperature and our transducer temperature, we're going to take a reading of inside the hull temperature here. And it looks like our kayak hull is somewhere right around 75 degrees. I'm going to attribute that to the fact that we've had this cover closed most of the day throughout all this testing, and it's kind of kept things cool inside there. As before, we'll make sure our Garmin Striker Fishfinder is on, and you can see our transducer right there mounted where it normally would be. And we're going to close this hatch, make sure everything's snug and tight, latch it up here, so it's just like it would be if we were on the water. An hour from now, we're going to find out the answer to the question, how hot does your transducer get when mounted inside the hull of your kayak? We're at the 1 hour mark now. It's time to find out the final temperature of our transducer while mounted inside the hull of the kayak. Current ambient temperature is still at 78 degrees. So one thing I've noticed over the last hour is that the sun has actually started to come out, and I'm pretty sure it's going to have an effect on some of our temperatures. Like right here, we know the outside ambient temperature is only 78 degrees, but because that sun's beating down on the kayak, we're actually showing 86 here on this black hatch. Another interesting development is actually the temperature of the Garmin Striker screen itself, which is pushing 90 plus degrees currently, which is over 10 degrees more than the current ambient temperature. Now let's pull our transducer and see what we're dealing with temperature-wise. Again, this has been after 1 hour sitting running inside the hull of the kayak. Alright, our current inside the hull kayak temperature is about 79 degrees. And let's pull our transducer so we can check the temperature. And our current transducer temperature is setting about 78 to 79 degrees. As you can see, that sun's really started to come out now, so we're actually going to leave everything sit here for another hour and get another set of readings on the in-hull transducer mount for our temperatures. Let's get that transducer back in the hull, especially now we got all this sun. So we're going to lift that up and we're going to drop this thing right back into the same spot where it came from. And we're going to leave it in there for another hour, get another set of readings. And we'll close that hatch up and lock everything away for the next hour. So I just got done moving the truck so that way there we can keep the entire kayak here, especially the part where we're taking our readings in the sun. And with the sun beating down now, we're going to get another set of readings here in about an hour. It's been about 30 minutes now, and I'm really interested to see what some of the external temperatures are of the kayak since it's been sitting out here in the sun. So with everything sitting out here in the sun, I'm really expecting to see these temperatures climb. And as you can see, we're looking at a Garmin Striker Fishfinder screen that's 115 degrees for our highest temperature. 113, 111, 110, and our highest we recorded was 114 degrees on the Striker screen itself. Now let's move over to this black cover where the transducer is, and I know this is going to be hot, especially being black and sitting in the sun. So we're looking at 110 degrees on this plastic here. And whoa, look here, it's 120, over 120 degrees here on this center console plastic right now. Oh, we just hit 129 in that spot. Seeing those temperatures increase like that really piqued my interest as far as what's going on in here where this transducer is. But we're not going to peak until the full hour's up. You can really see that sun starting to beat down and heat everything up here on the kayak. The thing I'm most interested in when we get our next reading is how hot this screen is. Because just feeling it right now, I can tell that that screen has gotten really hot. Even compared to what I would have expected as far as heat on all these black covers and hatches and the plastic on this kayak, which are actually starting to get pretty warm to the touch right now. But we have about 15 more minutes before we find out our next set of temperatures. Alright, so just after an hour here, we're going to check our temperatures of the black cover here where our transducer is actually mounted inside the hull. And it looks like a maximum temperature we found 144 degrees. That's insane. All these temperatures are reading over 120 degrees right now on this cover. Let's move on down the kayak here and let's check some of these plastic temperatures. Yeah, still we're over, oh wow, 140 degrees right there on the bow. And as we come down the side and check the center cover area here, we're 135, 140, 130. It's cooling down a little bit as we get into the lighter tones of colors, but still that's insane for a temperature of just sitting out here in the sun for just over an hour. And it's back up to 80 degrees here for ambient temperature. So that's a high temperature rise for an 80-degree day just from sitting in the direct sun. Now it's time to check what I'm most interested in, and that's the temperature of this screen on the head unit for this Garmin Striker Fishfinder. We can see we've got a max temperature right now of 134 degrees on the screen itself. Trying to see if we have anything hotter than it, but still that screen alone is almost 125 to 130 degrees in every place. I'll be honest with you, looking at a temperature of over 130 degrees on that screen, it's not really the transducer that's worrying me right now. It's the high temperatures that that screen can reach. Alright, the moment of truth here, we're going to open up this bow cover and check our temperatures for our transducer here. First, we're going to look inside and see what our temperature is inside of here. And we're looking about 89, 90, I'd say in general it looks like about 90 degrees for a general consensus here inside the hull of this kayak. And since we're in here, let's get a reading on that transducer. About 88 degrees for our transducer temperature while sitting inside the hull of the kayak. It has been a long day of experimentation and testing with our Garmin Striker 4 Fishfinder. And to say that our results were a little interesting would be an understatement. Looking back at today's results, I think it's safe to say that your transducer doesn't produce enough heat to cause any damage when mounted inside the hull of your kayak. However, I will say it was very interesting to see the high temperatures on the screen itself and the kayak while it was sitting out in the sun. And with that said, I would be more worried about your screen getting too hot than your transducer while it's mounted inside the hull of the kayak. I hope you found this video interesting and as informative as I did making it. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask down in the comment section below, and we'll see you next time on the water.